So dudes, this attachment might have ruined scope balancing in Rainbow Six Siege and makes bots like me look like Shroud. I am, of course, talking about the 1.5 scope. I'm G, and my mission is to help you understand Rainbow Six Siege. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the little hot potato balancing problem we got going on with the old 1.5 scope, everybody's favorite. This thing has been the subject of controversy for a couple of years now. Mainly, not because it's OP, not because it's broken, but because it seems to be used as a way to make or break operators based on stats like pick rate. Before we continue, this video was sponsored by Apex Gaming PCs, custom-built PCs with a great support system from the company itself. Use my code Gregor to get a discount at the link in the description. Sometimes it feels like this thing was more trouble than it's worth. But what makes it so special? I want to give an overview of this attachment, the baggage it seemed to come with contextually, as well as why it was ever added in the first place, and any potential solutions we might have for scope balancing in Siege. I mean, just look at it. The crosshair's sharp as a razor. Everybody likes that. Alright, so the 1.5 scope is available to a number of operators, but its main advantage seems to become quite relevant on defense, where you can play in a passive way and hit people who walk into your line of sight from afar. For this reason, you will notice that not a lot of defenders have scopes with a big zoom on them. When an operator does have a high zoom scope, it's usually something principally unique about their character. For instance, Cade and Goyle get 2x scopes on their TCSGs, but those are semi-automatic guns. And Rook and Tachanka get 2x scopes on their SMG primaries. But without such things, their overall kit leaves something to be desired. So it makes sense to give those guys some help. The point is, the 1.5 scope is a significant balancing metric. The 1.5 scope does just what it says. You have the same level of ADS on any gun that provides no magnification. The 2x scope essentially cuts your FOV in half and lets you zoom with twice the amount of visual fidelity you would normally get from default. There's just one problem. Rainbow Six Siege is a game about fighting inside a building, for the most part. And this tunnel visions you. You can't see your peripherals really well, and it can make it difficult to fight up close. As such, the 1.5 scope is considered by many to be the best scope in Rainbow Six Siege, despite the fact that many people have quote-unquote better options available. For instance, on Ram, she gets the 2x on her R4C, which a lot of people may really like. But the 1.5 is just so good that people will use less zoom over more zoom. The 1.5 combines everything that you like about additional zoom without tunnel visioning you, and still makes you a force to be reckoned with in close-range gunfighting. It is the best of both worlds. It makes hitting those clean headshots oh so easy without sacrificing your situational awareness, and that is really nice to have. The design intention of this scope was to give a lot of operators a little bit more of a gunfighting punch where they initially lacked it, and perhaps were a bit undertuned as a result. A good example of this is Castle. It's widely agreed that the UMP-45 is just not a great gun. It has a low rate of fire and not particularly great damage output. But what does it have? No recoil. So if you put a scope on this thing, in a game with one-shot headshot, you can leverage your mechanical talent, your skill to win gunfights, anyway. If you hit a nasty one-shot pixel angle with a 1.5 UMP, you can feel like you earned that pick. Maybe you might feel like you pulled off a really good shot, even though you had a little bit of help. You were already fighting at a disadvantage in some ways versus somebody with a high zoom L85, for instance, which has a 1.5. It was the perfect way to buff some operators that were somewhat lacking without making them overpowered, because it ultimately came down to you, the player, to hit that shot. It's skill expression, and we like that. Unfortunately, despite this, there are some drawbacks to the 1.5's addition, because even though skill expression was a valid argument for the existence of the 1.5, it still did not eliminate a principal problem. What was the incentive of using any other option besides the 1.5? And how much does this scope make or break an operator? Does it make a player lean too much on the gunfighting of the operator and ignore the gadgetry? We ran into this problem with Warden not too long ago, and Alibi not too long before that. I call it the gunner of the month. It always seems to be the case that a ranked rat will gravitate towards the path of least resistance in terms of the gunfighting department, and that gunfighter will usually have a 1.5 scope. Some operators get slept on, and some get played till the end of time. This can be fun if the operator's gadget has limited use case scenarios. But if the gadget is particularly powerful with a wide range of use case scenarios, it can mean that there are virtually no downsides to a particular character, and that can cause balancing problems. At one point, it was taken away from Mute's MP5K because he was a little too good. He could do everything. He could do a top floor roam and side anchor really well. So to keep him from being able to do as involved of a sight setup on other parts of the map, besides the bomb sites, they made him a 1-speed and hindered his ability to fight at long range while away from the site by taking away the 1.5. Not a lot of people will encounter this if they don't play competitive, but when I played competitive, Mute's speed change made it a huge pain in the ass to incorporate him into certain strategies. Sometimes it felt impossible. I understand that a game has to be balanced for it to be fun, but also somewhat overtuned characters can be fun to play. In my opinion, I don't think Mute needed the speed change. But not only did he get a speed change, he got his 1.5 taken away too. One of the calling cards of Mute was his flexibility. And in a really subtle way, it kind of took away a part of his character. You could sight anchor with him, you could roam with him, but it wasn't the end of the world if you decided to do either or. That gameplay loop is kind of gone. You can theoretically play top floor with him still, but that free armor rating doesn't just make his sight setup slower, it also makes a ton of noise and makes it difficult for him to play aggressively. The 1.5 was the only thing allowing him to play from that position disadvantage. Now he can't really roam the same way he used to. I think that's kind of lame. I had fun playing Mute that way, and now I can't. This has happened to other operators as well, resulting in some weird precedents in terms of game balancing that almost feel like they're done on purpose to justify decisions made later down the line. At one point, Alibi was given a 1.5 scope, which a lot of people predicted would make Alibi into a Gunner of the Month. When she became a Gunner of the Month, which resulted in her getting a recoil nerf to her MX4, a lot of people thought that series of events was super suspicious and said that Ubisoft must have done that to justify giving her a gun nerf eventually. Sequences of events like this have not helped Ubisoft beat the nerfing everyone allegations, and it remains to be seen how it will affect President John Ubisoft in the coming election cycle. I'm kidding, but this has happened more than a couple of times. Sometimes the 1.5 is used to help add a little layer of good aiming skill expression to players, but a lot of the time it's also felt like a punishment to players for fragging out with the character. Now, if all that sounds like a massive pain in the butt, it could be a lot worse. And if that seems unbelievable, we gotta go back in time, which for me doesn't seem like that long ago considering I've been playing the game since beta, but it is relatively recent if we look at the grand scheme of things. The 1.5 was added during the big scope balancing patch that came with Operation Shadow Legacy. It introduced a lot of cool stuff and made Chalet into a great competitively viable map. It added Sam Fisher, and who doesn't like Sam Fisher? I guess I'm exposing my age once again. It also removed ACOG from a ton of operators, and it made it into something of a novelty rather than a given on a lot of characters. You see, Rainbow Six Siege had this thing before the 1.5. It was called the ACOG, and the ACOG was one of the most coveted attachments of all time. It seemed to be the difference maker for an operator. A lot of operators had this thing, and eventually it got taken away. Smoke had an ACOG on his SMG-11, Jaeger had an ACOG on his 416, of course Ash had an ACOG on her R4C. So when people say we're in a TDM meta, let me assure you, it could be a million times worse. This was the era of Siege history where Bolo started to get on the map with his crazy ACOG quick leaning displays of Siege Kung Fu. It was not a good time to be a potato aimer in Siege. The skill differential that rested on gunplay here was so big that we spent years trying to correct it. You basically didn't stand a fighting chance if your mechanics suffered just a little bit. So if you think you're suffering because of your bad aim now, it could be a lot worse. I think a lot of people are right to point out the TDM meta, but I also think that a lot of people are writing a bandwagon talking point because they didn't see what I saw. They didn't see ACOG on Zofia, on IQ, on Ash, on Sledge, on Thatcher. ACOG ruled the day. The scope was on the opposite end of the curve. At the time, because of the snappy leaning, you could manipulate your hitbox to mitigate the disadvantages of having a smaller FOV when scoped in. Not to mention, gunplay in general was just a million times faster. Leaning was faster, ADS was faster. To get around what the game seemed to be becoming, Ubisoft finally put their foot down and started to come up with a general theme of where they wanted the game to be in terms of pacing and speed. So the movement was slowed down from an arcadey speed to a more tactical speed, and high zoom optics were essentially taken away from just about everyone. Operators who kind of deserved them kept them. For instance, Osa can run an ACOG on her 5.56, which suits her ability to play with the shield from far away and take pot shots. I like to take advantage of that ability from time to time, but right now, the pacing of the game isn't suited to that. You do gotta get in the building and door kick. So a lot of people end up not using the ACOG anymore, and will now use the 1.5 instead. The way scopes are assigned in Siege works like this. Everything in between the 1x and the highest zoom option is available to you. So OSA has an ACOG at 2.5 magnification, but you can also use a 2x or a 1.5 or a 1x. Most people use the other options, not the ACOG. So even though the ACOG is given as an option, supposedly because other people shouldn't have it, people will still run the 1.5 anyway. In terms of its impact on gameplay, the 1.5 is very forgiving in terms of your positioning for gunfights. Whereas with an ACOG, you kind of have to limit yourself to that long-range gameplay, and with the 1x, you kind of have to know what you're doing to pick it over a 1.5. You got to get up close and personal and play like Shaiko, or you're probably going to look like you're just showing off. When it comes to the 1.5, you can be wherever you want. You can fight at close range, you can fight at medium range, you can even fight at long range. The 1.5 is suitable to pretty much every engagement distance in Siege. And in Siege, you want to be flexible in the gunfighting department. You don't want to pigeonhole yourself too much. And if you have a specialization, it better be pretty freaking powerful. Smoke with a shotgun and SMG-11 may only be particularly suited to close range gunfighting, but if you're cracked enough with the SMG-11, you can pull off some crazy kills from a distance. So you have the specialization of being one of the best close range gunfighters, but you're not handicapped by not having a 1.5. It's tough to talk about any kind of disadvantage for the 1.5, which seems to be the unique problem. There really isn't any strong disadvantage to using this scope one way or the other. The only disadvantage you can really seem to incur is not using a higher zoom scope. And in many cases, you don't really need to, because the 1.5 is still a great sight despite not having that zoom advantage. Another aspect about the 1.5 that is particularly strong is that the sight picture is actually quite clean. It's basically a tiny little dot. And in a game where you need precision over just about everything else for headshots, a small aiming point is going to be nice to have, because it's a little bit more precise, especially at the longer distances you can get away with fighting on this little scope. Not to mention, the actual housing of the scope is not that obstructive. The reticle is clear and the housing is clear, so you don't lose much vision. Usually, even the 1x optics have certain kinds of drawbacks. I like the tiny and clear sight picture of the Hollow A, but the housing is blocky. It's designed this way on purpose to provide some kind of caveat in terms of using that optic. Now, there are some optics where I'm just profoundly confused as to why they are the way they are, like the Russian Hollow. In fact, I'm actually a fan of the Cybertruck Hollow. I'm a fan of the reticle at least, which strikes the balance between a tiny little dot and a reasonably sized dot. But I can't use it without everybody making fun of me. And I'm a sensitive little bitch, so I take what I can get. Hey, wait a minute. So if I use a weird optic, that would mean more people would comment, which increases engagement. Wait, I'm still recording. The biggest problem overall with the 1.5 then seems to be when it's added, there's no incentive to not use it. And if you do have an incentive to use it, you're probably a high-level player who's at a mechanical point where you're actually benefiting from the slightly higher FOV of the 1x optic. And that's just not a lot of people. Understandably, this makes things a little complicated to explain to the average person, because lots of people will use or not use the scope for different reasons. However, it seems to be the consensus, at least among my community, that the 1.5 scope has been an overall net positive to the game. I say net positive because that acknowledges there are certainly some drawbacks from a balancing perspective, which I have discussed already. Out of 1,200 votes, which is more than enough of a good sample size to gauge at least where my community stands, 59% of people feel like the scope helped, but came with some baggage. That's more than half of the population of this data set. The second highest polling option was that it helped and there is no issue whatsoever. However, this population is outnumbered by both the other options of people saying that the scope was hurting the game overall. In fact, 22% of people feel like the scope hurts the game in some way. The disagreement there is how to deal with it, or to deal with it at all. About half of this group doesn't feel like the problem is strong enough to warrant a change, while the other group thinks it is pervasive and a serious problem. This is a pretty standard and valid data set. And ultimately, in my opinion, I can see good arguments for each of these statements. I don't think there is necessarily a right or wrong take here. I think that there is a strong argument to keep the 1.5 the way it is, and a strong argument to seriously look at it. Scott Huffman said, "I don't think the scope itself is the issue. I think it's the fact that it's been used to band-aid certain ops when they really should get more in-depth changes." This is a valid take, because it's certainly a fact that this has happened. It happened with Thorn when she got a 1.5 added to her UZK, at a time where it seemed like her gadget needed a little bit more love. Now, I'm a weirdo who already kind of liked using Thorn without the 1.5, but with that, she became a pretty fun gunner operator, and I think she might take Warden's place here sooner than later, if she hasn't already. However, when it comes down to actual changes, what should we do? Well, what seems to be the rationale for the devs? They've used the 1.5 as a balancing metric. If we go back in time to the alibi situation, They highlighted in their own words that the 1.5 is fun to use, but the pick rate was going up too fast and the KD was going up too high with Alibi. So while Ubisoft does show us the win deltas that weigh win rate versus pick rate, they do look at KD rates for individual operators and weigh that into the equation most certainly. Their logic dictates that the 1.5 is better, at least for a decent margin of people, because it does seem to have an effect on win rate and kill death ratio, a positive one. That means the 1.5 is better based off of the data that they are looking at. Now, this is just data, and this is an interpretation of the data, but at the same time, is the operator fun because they're getting more picks? Well, surely you can't get away from that in a multiplayer FPS game. That's always going to dictate a certain level of compromise to make sure people aren't abusing busted characters. In Year 8 Season 3, the Warden meta was finally taken into consideration, and he got a speed nerf, not a scope nerf. I think nerfing his scope would have been a bad idea. In my opinion, and in this example, this seemed to me like an example of the devs' logic winning out. We believe the 1.5x on the MPX synergizes well with this kit to counter smokes from far away. So rather than change that, we're going to reduce his speed. They made him into a Warden, a sight anchor. The 1.5 suits him. By that logic, why did Mute lose the 1.5? In my opinion, situations like Alibi, not so good. Situations like how Warden turned out, that makes sense. At another point, Mira had a 1.5 on her Vector, so we're definitely okay with giving powerful characters 1.5s at least for a little while, before we realize what we've done and then change it back. Some operators have the 1.5 on guns that you can make an argument for being slightly overtuned on. For whatever reason, I don't see anyone talk about Goyo, even though he's got a 1.5 on the Vector. That gun is crazy with a 1.5. If Ubisoft continues handling gun optics in regards to the actual kit of the character, the gameplay loop that they have, then I can see stronger, more concrete arguments for different balance changes. But if the optic is just going to be a weird balancing hot potato forever, it's a bit more difficult in my eyes, and I can understand why they want to address it. So what exactly can Ubisoft do? Well, it seems we could just have a flat rule, like we had for the ACOGs a long time ago, except this time it would just apply to weapons that defenders have. It seems to be the problem with this optic having to do more so with defending positioning, not attackers. The flat rule we had before was no ACOG if you were faster than a 3 armor. Why would this rule not apply now? No 1.5 or maybe no scopes at all if you're faster than a 3 armor. That would be very harsh. That'd be a strict adjustment, but it would ensure a baseline moving forward that would make it less confusing when operators get adjusted. It would, however, beg the question as to why operators like Melusi don't get a 1.5, despite getting nerfed so many times. And despite going from hero to zero, kind of, when Fenrir got added. Melusi is essentially an anchor now. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I don't think there's such a thing as a bad operator in Siege, but Melusi definitely just isn't as good of a character as she used to be. So what's the deal? Why can't she have a 1.5? When Fenrir is an S-tier character with a great primary weapon and tons of fragging potential. We all know why Azami can't have a 1.5 unless you're using the shotgun. So let's take that precedent. Rule number 1, you can only have a 1.5 if you're on a 3 armor, or if you have a low rate of fire weapon. I think the low rate of fire weapon would definitely be a strong argument, because it would at least give skilled players the ability to hit more shots, while not making the weapon itself outright too powerful. So if you have good aim, you can take advantage of that 1.5 on that crap weapon, much like good players can take advantage of the 1.5 on Castle's UMP45. So that's a hybrid solution I kind of have. Only give it to 3 armored defenders, or operators with a full auto primary below a fire rate of around 780. I think the MP5 would skirt right by there and get the scope based on that. I forget the exact number. By that logic, you can make Jaeger into a 3 armor and give his 416 a 1.5, which, you know, I'm not exactly opposed to, although I think it would be better to just repurpose the 416 on a different operator and give it some scopes then. But that's just me. Kind of like how you can have a 1.5 on the MP7 for Sam Fisher on attack, rather than Bandit or Fenrir on defense. But yeah, that's my opinion. Don't try to give too many operators exceptions, Ubisoft. There are times where I think it makes sense for an operator to have a 1.5, and there are lots of situations where I'm also like, okay, dude, why are we removing this? I brought up the Mute example a couple of times already. Admittedly, it probably is my fault by pointing it out in How to Play Every Operator 2022. By the way, How to Play Every Operator 2024 comes out December 21st, so hit the bell if you want to see that when it comes out. But some operators don't need to get hit that hard with a Nerf bat. I think you should give some players an avenue for skill expression. So yeah, my main points are, the 1.5 scope is a very, very good scope. Not even necessarily because it's particularly good at anything. But because it's not bad at anything, and anything in Siege that is not bad at anything is going to be very, very good. Duh. I think that Ubisoft should have a hard defined parameter of who is allowed to get this thing or not. And if they're gonna adjust scopes at all in the future, try to do it in a way that doesn't take away avenues of skill expression when it comes to the actual gunfighting. One-shot headshot is fun. Hitting headshots in this game is fun. Make it feel earned. Make it feel rewarding. That's my take. It should probably not be allowed to be used by as many operators. It should be a special thing you give under certain circumstances, at least for defenders. For attackers, I don't really care, because they have it hard enough as is, especially with Fenrir, Azami, Solus, and Tubarão in the game right now. I encourage you all to share your thoughts on the 1.5's potential balance issues in the comments. I won't read everything, because my therapist told me I should stop. But I will ask you to say something anyway, you know? So give the video a like and subscribe for future discussions like this one. And finally, thank you for watching and engaging with the video. Check out my socials here. I post schizo ramblings on Twitter frequently, and I also upload on TikTok and Instagram. Those links are on the screen. This Friday, I'll be uploading a video with a whole bunch of tips that'll help you rank up in Rainbow Six Siege. It's one of the more involved videos that'll be on this channel. And before I go on Christmas vacation, I do have that special How to Play Every Operator 2024, December 21st. I can't wait to share that video with you all. It is a very different format than you may be used to. I know I missed it last year. We'll just pretend that didn't happen. I don't know if everybody's going to like the new format, but I'm happy with it. So if I like it, I think you'll like it as well. I'll see you all on Friday. Thanks again for watching. Deuces.